Good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast, and good morning to those of you on the West Coast. My name is Phil Buchanan, and hopefully you are on the line because you want to hear about working with grantees and the Grantee Perception Report. Please know that you can submit questions throughout via the question box on your screen, and really excited to have you all here with us today. In addition to myself, and I'm going to act as host and moderator, my colleague Kevin Boldick is here with me. Grace Nicolette, our colleague, had been billed as a speaker via email but has lost her voice completely, and so Kevin will be stepping in so that you can actually hear from us. We're also really delighted to have with us today Thayer DuPont, who's president of the Longwood Foundation. In that capacity, oversees $22 million in grants to the people, environment, and communities of Delaware and southern Chester County, Pennsylvania. Longwood has completed 2 grantee perception reports and applicant perception reports commissioned from the Center for Effective Philanthropy. Obviously, the grantee perception report solicits the perspective of funded grantees, and the applicant perception report is based on a shorter survey of declined applicants. We're really grateful to Thayer for taking the time to talk with us about his experience, and in particular, he's going to focus on the grantee perception report, the GPR. What we're going to do today is Kevin's going to provide a bit of an overview of the GPR, how it works, what it can tell you, what it can't do for you, and he'll also talk a little bit about a new way of sharing grantee perception reports that we've introduced this year, our online reporting system, which just allows for a more interactive experience on the part of foundations that are trying to make sense of their results. We'll then hear from Thayer about his perspective, and then we'll ask him some questions and get questions from all of you, either for Thayer about his experience or from Kevin about the GPR. If you don't know CEP, just tell you that we're a nonprofit. We've been around for 12 years now, and we focus on providing data and creating insights so funders can better define, assess, and improve their effectiveness, and as a result, their impact. So CEP's work covers a lot more than just the grantee perception report, and I hope you will, if you haven't, visit our website and see that we have a variety of publications that are free for download, that are really intended to be helpful to foundation leaders as they think about challenges like foundation grantee relationships, foundation performance assessment, foundation strategy. In addition to the grantee perception report, we have a variety of other assessment tools, including a staff perception report that's becoming more and more widely adopted. We have a blog which I hope you'll read, which engages with a lot of the challenges of foundation leadership, and also discusses issues more broadly related to the nonprofit sector. And then we have a major conference every other year that brings foundation leaders together. We just had ours, so we don't have one on the near-term horizon. But in due time, you'll hear about that. So that's who we are. And as I said, today we're going to focus on the Grantee Perception Report. The Grantee Perception Report is a tool that we created we piloted it in 2002 and rolled it out in 2003. And Kevin, who you'll hear from in a moment, was there from the beginning in designing that tool, and it really is about hearing from those you fund, their perspectives on what it's like to work with you, how they see your impact, their relationship with you, your assistance beyond the grant, a wide range of different dimensions. And the notion here, as Kevin will emphasize, I think, is not that the Grantee Perception Report is the be-all, end-all, not like it's going to answer all your questions about performance assessment, but that it does provide really valuable insight from a group of folks who you might not otherwise hear such direct feedback from. So I'll leave it at that, I think, and turn it over to Kevin to go deeper into what the grantee perception report is and how it works.
Great. Thank you so much, Phil. To get started, I want to add one piece to the history of the grantee perception report that Phil was mentioning. When we first were piloting the survey, one of the things that we heard again and again from the folks in the field who are looking to use grantees' perceptions and feedback to help improve their work was that as they surveyed their own grantees, it was really hard to understand what grantees were, what a rating from a grantee on a survey was really about. And so as we set out to develop the grantee perception report, we worked really closely with funders in the field to understand the topics that were of the most importance to them and to create a process in which you would be able to get some sort of benchmarking data to help normalize what are often quite positive grantee perception or grantee survey responses. So what does the grantee survey cover? For those of you who aren't familiar with this tool, the survey, we have a standard survey that we use with the grantees of all the funders that work with us. It's made up of about 50 questions that get at aspects of grantees' perceptions of your impact on your fields or your communities, and importantly, the ways in which you either strengthen or don't strengthen the organizations that you're working with. We look at relationships, the quality of interactions, and the clarity and consistency of communications with grantees. Of course, we look at the application and the reporting and evaluation processes to get a sense of whether those are helpful with grantees, for grantees, and what the burden is of those processes. And for some foundations who are trying to do more than just give grants, we also look at aspects of assistance that you might provide beyond the grant checks and non-monetary assistance for grantees. Now, that's the standard questions in the survey. They take about 20 to 30 minutes for a grantee to respond to. We get great response rates between usually 60 and 80% for these kinds of surveys. But obviously, every foundation is distinct. You have your own goals and strategies and practices and context. And so a big piece of this grantee survey is a customized portion of the survey that we work with you to develop to really reflect your work as an organization and ensure that you're getting the kind of feedback about specific aspects of your work that wouldn't be relevant to other foundations who might be participating in this grantee perception report. So what does the comparative data look like? And as I mentioned, we think that this is a really important piece of the grantee perception report. You can meaningfully benchmark your foundation against the work of other funders who are similar to you. Given that we've been doing these kinds of surveys for about a decade now, the comparative data set that we have is fairly broad. It's made up of 295 foundations representing responses from more than 40,000 grantees from the United States and increasingly around the world. The size of the foundations in our data set range from quite small, making only a few $100,000 a year in grants, to at the high end. Obviously, this is the Gates Foundation with more than $30 billion in assets. And those are just a few of the characteristics of the breadth of our comparative data set. And increasingly, what we've been able to do is really work with individual funders to customize a peer group that is really relevant to anyone who's participating. We have family foundations, corporate foundations, private foundations, locally focused, internationally focused foundations. We've done surveys in English and French and Hebrew and Spanish. The range of responses and foundations captured in the comparative data set at this point is quite immense, and we think that it adds real value to be able to look at your results relative to peers. So why is comparative data so important? Well, say you want to ask your grantees how much impact they think you've had on their organizations, and you see that across your grantees you have been rated on average around a 6. Now, in isolation, that might seem like a really great response. And of course, there's an aspect of this that is great. Most grantees are giving you ratings on the high end of a scale. But put into a comparative context, what we can see is that there's still a range of possibly greater or better results. A 6.0 on this particular question in our data set is only in the 32nd percentile. So what that tells us is that there's an opportunity for improvement. And that's really what the comparative data and the benchmarking is about. It's not about who's the best or who's the worst. It's about normalizing grantee responses, which are often positive, so that you can understand what the range of possibility is, where there might be opportunities for you to improve, where there might be opportunities to share your strengths or to capitalize on them more broadly with individual grantees. So that's the comparative data. Now, all of this data and all of the data in the world is not very important unless it's driving change in organizations. And we practice what we preach. We use a third party, the LFA group, to reach out to folks who've used the GPR to understand what kinds of changes they're making based on the data that they receive from their grantees and the feedback they receive from their declined applicants. And what we see here is that every single organization that uses this tool makes some sort of change in their work based on the feedback that they hear. We see that over 80% of users of the grantee perception report say that they've modified their selection of their reporting processes or changed the way that they've communicated with their grantees. And significant numbers of users say that they've changed the assistance they're providing beyond the grant check or even changed the grant-making strategy, which is a pretty high bar for something like the grantee survey. And I think importantly, 100% of the folks who've used the grantee perception report more than once say that they would recommend it to other funders. And that's where I think that is a real testament to the value of grantee feedback. And on the flip side, what we hear from grantees who are responding to this survey is that they appreciate the opportunity to really, through a third party, give candid and confidential feedback about the important work that they're doing with their philanthropic funders. All of you play important parts in the lives of the nonprofit organizations that are your partners in creating impact. And of course, they have thoughts about what you're doing incredibly well that they'd like to share in a sort of protected environment, and often thoughts about what you can do even better. So one other way to look at whether the grantee perception report provides meaningful information to foundations that are using it or funders that are using it is to look not just at self-reports of change, but to also look at whether grantee ratings can change and whether grantee ratings are changing as folks continue to use the grantee perception report more than once. 90-plus funders, like the Longwood Foundation there, who we'll hear from in just a second, have used the grantee perception report more than once. 80% of them, to give you an example, saw improvement in ratings of impact on grantees' organizations. And that's just one question, but we know that this trend holds true for many of the questions in the grantee survey. So it's not just that folks are reporting change, but grantees are recognizing and experiencing change in their work with their philanthropic funders. At this point, we've been doing this long enough that there have actually been folks who have used the grantee perception report 3 or 4 or 5 times. And we now have almost 40 funders who have used the grantee perception report at least 3 times. And one of the huge questions that we started to ask ourselves over the course of the last couple of years was whether this trend of improved experiences from grantees would continue. And the good news is that we see that it holds stable or continues to improve. We don't see on average declines as folks continue to use the grantee perception report to monitor their performance. And in fact, when we looked at those 36 funders who had used the grantee perception report at least 3 times, we saw an even further increased number of funders who had seen their ratings of grantees' ratings of impact on their organizations rise. And again, that held true for other questions in the grantee survey. So it's great evidence that not only can this kind of feedback fuel change for individual foundations and their practices and processes, but that those changes really matter to grantees in their day-to-day work with their foundations. So I'm going to move now from this sort of overview of the grantee perception report to a very quick introduction of the tool itself and the way that we present it so that you can use an online system to really engage with this kind of information and ask questions of the data that your grantees have provided. As I move to that section, I just want to remind you that you can ask questions at any time, and only we'll see those questions, and Phil's going to be moderating some of the questions that are flowing in, either for CEP or for Thayer when we get to his section in just a second. So, as I mentioned, the grantee perception report is now, as are all of CEP's tools, presented through an online system, a secure online system that gives you an opportunity to really engage with the data itself. I'm going to play a little dynamic clip here now of what the system looks like. You can see as we click from section to section, you can look at past results on or off. You can control the kinds of comparisons of comparative data that you'd like to see in the tool itself. And of course, you can see segmentations of the data that you would define as a user, perhaps program area or grant size or geography or whatever the kinds of ways are that you'd like to slice and dice your own data. Now, of course, in addition to the online reporting system, you have a printable report and a narrative report that gives you some suggestions from CEP, but we really think this online report has added something to users' ability to really engage with this data. So what does it take to participate in the Grantee Perception Report? To keep costs down, we do these surveys in 3 rounds a year, launching in February, May, and September. The timeline is about 4 months from start to finish. We work with you first to customize the information that we'll add to the survey. Then we handle the launch of the survey, and you'll get reports back just a few months after the survey is launched. And we really aim to make participation as easy on you as possible. Most of what we'll need from you is basically in the first month of our engagement prior to the launch of the survey. We'll work really closely with you to help you pull your grantee list together, and most importantly, to customize the survey with additional questions relevant to your goals and strategies and context. And because our staff are experts at survey customization at this point, we can really do the heavy lifting of drafting customized questions that fit your needs and describe your initiatives. What we'd be working with you to do is understand the topics that aren't already addressed in the Grantee Perception Report that you'd like to add. Then right before the survey launches, we have you announce to grantees that the survey is coming, and then we handle the rest. So we launch the survey, we interact with grantees who have questions, we keep you updated on response, and then we analyze and create your report. So what does this cost? Always an important question. The full cost of the Grantee Perception Report generally ranges from around $13,000 to higher for very complex projects or funders. But we really aim to be flexible in the scope of this work and in the cost, in the hopes that as many folks as possible can engage with this kind of information. The price is driven by the size of the foundation, the number of grantees that we're serving, and the level of customization that you want. And then, of course, one of the things that we can do very quickly for you is give you a sense of what it would cost for you to participate in the Grantee Perception Report. It's just a few pieces of information. So I hope as we get through this webinar today, if you're interested, you'll drop us a quick line, and we'll have some contact information for you later in this webinar to just get a sense of what it might cost for your organization to participate in the grantee survey. And the nice thing is that right now, as we plan for 2014 and fill these survey rounds, we're running a bit of an early bird discount, so you can receive $1,000 off the price of your Grantee Perception Report if you commit to participating in one of these rounds of 2014 surveys by the end of this month. So that's the Grantee Perception Report. That's CEP's perspective on it. But of course, what we would also want to do is hear from somebody who has used the Grantee Perception Report. And as Phil mentioned today, we have with us Thayer DuPont, the president of the Longwood Foundation. Thayer's on the line now, and I'm going to spend just a few minutes asking Thayer some questions about his experience with the grantee and applicant perception reports. Phil, I think, is starting to see some questions come through from folks. So please keep them coming, and we'll either slot those in for Thayer or respond to them as we get through this next little portion with Thayer. So Thayer, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, Kevin. Thanks for the opportunity.
Wonderful. So I wondered if we could just start out a little bit with a very basic question about why you and your colleagues at the Longwood Foundation chose to conduct the Grantee Perception Report.
Well, I think it was for us among the handful of measurements that we could put in place to spur ourselves towards continuous improvement. You know, we recognize that our mission is not necessarily to make the nonprofits in Delaware and Southern Chester County happy. So we don't want to overweight those tools, but we also know we can't possibly succeed without them. If they're not happy, they're not going to be maximizing the impact of our dollars. So we want to do whatever we can to make our dollars, our grant dollars, as effective as they make their way to the community. In parallel, we're also have started a routine evaluation process where we're grading ourselves on how successful our nonprofits are at achieving the outcomes that they describe in their grant requests. So to us, that's an equally valuable measure, but different, and it's very important to understand how we're perceived by our grantees. And our view is that we want to, from a timing perspective, I don't think you've noted already, but we did our 2 surveys at a 3-year interval. We take the view that most change in the philanthropic and social sector takes 2 to 3 years at best. And so measuring ourselves at that interval, we could probably do it at 2, but we've chosen 3 at this point to give ourselves feedback. And finally, repeating the process is essential to measuring, if you go back to the fundamental thesis here of continuous improvement, to knowing whether whatever changes we did in response to the first one had the desired impact. There's always the chance they'll actually make things worse. So best to know that not only did they stay the same, in fact, they got better in the few categories which we were really targeting improvement in.
That's great. Thank you for that background. I wonder, you just touched on the topic of sort of improvement over time, which Longwood has seen some real success in. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of foundations have seen that if they really make an effort to change certain processes, they can see that reflected in changes in grantees' experience. I wonder if you could describe one of the biggest successes that you think you've had, or you and your colleagues think you've had, in improving your work with grantees.
Sure. When we took the first survey, one of the areas where we performed the lowest, there was lots of positive feedback, which was great, where we were performing well and having a significant impact on the community and on the fields in which our nonprofits operated. In the area of can-do-betters, lead on the list was a 25th percentile performance around the clarity of communications of the foundation's goals and strategy. Well, frankly, that shouldn't have surprised any of us. We didn't even have a website at the time we did this. We operate a little slower than the rest of the world. We did a couple of things in response to that measure. First of all, we specifically targeted it and said we want to make a meaningful improvement on that. We made a point, first of all, of sending an email/memo out to everybody who had participated in the first round of the request, saying thank you, appreciate your first round of the GPR, saying thank you, we appreciate your participation, and here's what we're going to do differently because of what you told us. We've posted that note on our website, and any of you, it's dated, but it's still on our website, so everybody can see what we changed in response, which started with getting a website up. It also included, I think significantly, a 15-minute call that I have with everybody who participates, every grantee and applicant, not just grantees. Anybody who puts an application into the foundation gets a 15-minute call with me after the trustees have met and made their decision. So they're getting live personal feedback on their request. If they got the grant, congratulations, and here's what we're expecting of you to confirm it. And if they didn't, here's what you can do better. So the combination of those two things, I think, had a significant impact. And in the second survey, we rose to the 78th percentile on the clarity of communications.
That's great. It's one of the largest, editorial action, it's one of the largest jumps in grantee perception report ratings that we've seen at CEP. It was a really substantial change in grantees' perceptions of the clarity, and so I think that clearly some of those efforts have really paid off more than actually we see it at a lot of other foundations. I wonder if you want to talk for a second about somewhere where the Longwood Foundation was already rated positively and then rated higher. As you mentioned earlier, there's an aspect of the grantee perception report that gets at the relationships that you have with grantees, your responsiveness and fairness and approachability and so forth. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about one of the other aspects that's really not about happiness or relationships at all, which is grantees' perceptions of your impact. You were rated around the 90th percentile in the first grantee perception report for grantees' perceptions that you had made an impact on their organizations, and then after your second survey, you were rated at the 99th percentile compared to other foundations for this important measure of impacting grantee organizations. What do you think's behind your ability to maintain that kind of really positive impact on grantees?
Well, my hypothesis, you never quite know. Obviously, we are doing something that people feel positive about, but our grant-making process starts with a request of the nonprofits to define how they measure success for their organization and where they are on that measurement today, where they expect to be on that measurement 2 to 3 years from now because of the grant. And so we engage, first of all, the idea of measuring themselves for, if I go back 2 or 3 years, for more than half of the nonprofits was a new idea, at least in Delaware. So there's an immediate dialogue of what can we measure? How can we measure it? And we had a lot of that conversation. We still have some of that conversation with many of our grantees. So even for those, and as I tell our nonprofits, even if what we're trying to do, and we keep our grant request process pretty simple, we want to tap into a nonprofit strategic plan that they have already discussed and engaged with their board on. And ideally, they can Xerox the 3 pages or email the 3 pages that are relevant to the request, that identify the measures that are relevant and where they are and where they expect to go, and then provide a couple pages of description as to how they're going to get there. For even those, and this came out of the applicant, the APR, even those who don't get a grant, the dialogue that we had in that process, I think has a meaningful impact on the organization. Sometimes it spurs them to actually have that conversation with their board. And so we're pleased, even if our dollars don't go there, that we can have an impact on the organization. I presume that improvement in the rating of impact in the organization for grantees is something similar, that dialogue helps them sharpen a thought process, a strategic thought process, and a strategic engagement with their board that really added value for them.
Thank you. So we've talked a little bit about a couple areas where you've had some real success in your work. And I wonder if there are any areas where you've either had some frustrations in your efforts to improve or continue to be less than completely satisfied in what you're hearing back from your grantees or your applicants.
Sure. So the second, well, an area we've been ranked low consistently is in the area of report and evaluation discussion. Our score actually declined from the first iteration to the second iteration, from the 47th percentile down to the 31st percentile. That was a really interesting result for us because we didn't change it. So kind of asking ourselves, why would our score decline? Well, I suppose it's possible that the whole field moved forward on us, and therefore we declined, which would be very valid. But I think our historical process was that we randomly identified 10 to 20% of our grant recipients, and then I would go out and have a meeting with them and discuss their outcomes. That's, I think, a fairly, that's not maximizing the learning that we could be doing and or sharing back with our nonprofits, our recipients. So we've kind of decided, and this is not only a product of 2 GPRs, it's also a product of having gone to the recent CEP conference in Detroit, where we were prodded on this by a number of speakers, we basically blew up the evaluation process and now went out and evaluated a whole cohort of recipients, about 43, 44 of them that had grants 2 years ago. And every one of them got a personal visit or a phone call. We accumulated those results, scored ourselves, scored each grant, how effective it was, scored ourselves, and we're about to follow the same process we did with the GPR, which is to publish those to that cohort. Here's what we learned from the process. Here's what we're changing. This evaluation process is going to go on for each cohort at about the 2-year interval. And I would hope, we'll find out in another 2 or 3 years when we do it again, that we'll see meaningful improvement on this item.
Great, thanks. This is Phil Buchanan, and I'm gonna bring in a couple of questions from participants. And obviously, feel free to type in more as they come to you. But this is a skeptic who, a self-described skeptic who, paraphrasing, but basically the question is, why do we care, in the sense that what the foundation is trying to do, this person writes, is have an impact, not have grantees rate highly on a survey. Help me understand how I can convince others at my foundation that this matters. And I think this person wants to hear from both of you. So maybe if you could speak to that, and then Kevin, maybe you could add your perspective.
Sure. Valid question, and I guess my perspective would be, in particular, if your foundation has a mission, something specific it's trying to accomplish, and has elected anything short of doing all of that work itself, you have a partner or multiple partners in the field who are taking your dollars and turning them into action that's going to produce what that mission is trying to achieve. If you don't understand what those partners really think about you and your processes and whether you're adding value to them or not, beyond just dollars coming in, which is always important, I don't think maximizing your ability to execute with the dollars you have at hand. And it is particularly tricky in the foundation, as I suspect many people on the line understand. You will almost never get the truth out of someone who is a potential recipient of money. They're going to tell you they love you whether they do or they don't. So getting understanding that fine distinction between a 6.0 and a 6.2 is meaningful information, and the safety process is a great way to get at it.
Good. Thanks, Kevin.
Sure. I think there echoes a lot of how we think about the grantee perception report and the value of it as well. I think the specific sort of examples that I could add to Thayer's response are all about improving the partnership between foundations and grantees. Not everybody uses that word, but if you think about the kinds of aspects that are addressed in this grantee perception report, is a grantee comfortable approaching the foundation if a problem arises? Well, that's about an opportunity to deploy resources in a way that really helps push forward work that both parties think are important. How clearly have you communicated your goals and strategies, and how clearly do grantees think that you understand their goals and strategies? That's all about mutual alignment. So there's an aspect of, for example, in the grantee perception report, of really going well beyond just sort of a popularity contest, which is meaningless in the grand scheme of creating impact, and getting at these kinds of concepts that are about a strong working relationship that allow both grantees and foundations to do their work better. And I really believe, having seen it again and again, and having worked with dozens of foundations over the course of the last decade, that those relationships, that the processes, the perceptions of impact are meaningful, both to foundations and to their grantees, and that this survey is a good way to understand, as Thayer mentioned, in an unbiased way, where you might have an opportunity to even further strengthen your work.
Great. This question is directed to you, Kevin, and it basically says you must have seen a lot of foundations. You say that that many have improved in their performance on the GPR over time. What about those who haven't? What's the difference in your observation between those who have and haven't. So I think what the question is getting at is those who've been able to have meaningful improvement versus those who have not or have slid. What are the patterns that you've seen in terms of foundations, the way they act on the results?
Sure. And of course, we do see some real examples of foundations moving the wrong direction after getting grantee perception report results. And I think there's a couple things really set apart the foundations that are making change and those that are not. One is a really clear articulation from leadership about why this matters. You know, we just heard this question from one of the skeptics on the line today, or maybe speaking for a skeptic at her or his organization. And I think that if leadership doesn't have a strong articulation of why grantee relationships, experiences, and feedback matters, change isn't going to happen. The second kind of thing that I think really helps is when foundations choose a limited number of items to focus on. So we heard Thayer talk about just a couple that he focused on from his first survey. There's a lot in this survey. So there's really a process of winnowing that I think each foundation has to do to understand what's core to its work and to help its own organization focus on making change in the areas that are most important to that foundation. So whether that be communications or application process or understanding grantees or relationships with grantees, choosing a couple and focusing on that is really important. Thirdly, I think where I've seen great success is when individual foundations who receive these results really engage their staff and their boards in thinking about these topics and these change efforts. No one person at a foundation really controls every aspect of a relationship with a grantee or an experience with a grantee. And so understanding how each different person and role in an organization plays into these results, and they certainly do, is really important. And getting ideas about how to improve from all of those folks is really important. So those are three things, I think, that really can help foundations, set apart foundations that are improving versus those that they either stay the same or get worse.
Great. The next one, maybe we go to Sarah first, and then Kevin, if you want to add anything. This person says, I'm sure we're not alone in thinking we are an unusual foundation. Can comparative data sets be tailored to be most relevant to particular foundations? Did Longwood compare itself to all funders in the data set, and was that meaningful?
So it's a great question. Of course we're all unique. And there's a dimension of that you kind of need to manage through this process. And we, one of the things I caution my trustees on as we look is this: we're not trying to become the average foundation in CEP's database. But we are trying to be as effective as we can with our dollars, and there's an important dimension of using this feedback to get better. So not only do we compare ourselves to everybody in CEP's database, we also, as they described earlier, as Kevin described earlier, had a customized set of regional, local, or locally focused foundations. I think it was 10 of them. And it was the same 10 foundations in our first and second iterations of the survey. So we could see how we changed against them and had a second, I'll call it more tailored, not a perfect match to everything we do, but a more tailored set of comparative data than the broad database.
Thanks, Sarah.
Great. Great. Anything you want to add to that, Kevin?
I would just briefly add that one of the real advantages of the online reporting system now is that we can, as Sarah was mentioning, not only show a single customized comparison for a foundation, but if there are several different aspects that are important to a foundation, we can show a few of those different customized cohorts. I was talking recently to a foundation that was focused in the education space, and they really wanted to see themselves relative to other education funders, regardless of the size of those funders. So somebody like Gates would be in their education comparative group. but they were not anywhere near the size of Gates, and they also wanted to know how they compared to other foundations of similar asset and giving parameters. And so we can create a second kind of comparison just to look at some of the structural aspects for foundations. And I think that the other thing that's important to think about is that, we talk a lot about perceptions and grantee experience, but there's also the aspect of the structure of individual foundations that do matter. And so part of what the Grantee Perception Report does is not only look at grantees' experiences, we collect some information from foundations about the way in which you do your work that not only help us develop these customized comparisons, but also we can then play back to individual funders some information about how their program caseload or their program structure compares to other folks in our data set. And that kind of operational benchmarking, I think, can be useful as well in understanding the determinants of sort of grantee experience with the foundation.
Great. Couple more questions. How do you get the board on board? So go ahead there.
I think the answer to that is, first of all, you identify this as something you want to do, and obviously get their approval, even if the expense is below a threshold that you may have to go to them for, because presumably there is going to be something of significance that you'll learn in the first iteration that you want to react to, which I would assume will be significant enough in process change or perhaps investment that you will be coming back to them. Secondly, once we got the results, we met as an internal team. We only have 4 people in the foundation, so it was relatively easy, and discussed them, agreed on our agenda going forward. We presented the agenda to the trustees in concert with, here's the executive summary of the report that CEP produced, and you're all welcome to the detailed report if you want it. I draw that process step in there as important because I would not hand them either the detailed or the executive summary version of the report without a proposal from you to what you're going to do about it, because, as has been pointed out, there's more than 50 questions. Your trustees could go, your board could go in any number of directions based upon their personal perspective on the foundation. You need to be leading where the foundation is going and then reacting to where they may disagree on the margin. I found that has worked twice so far, and hopefully will continue to work in the future.
That's great. Thank you there. Kevin, you would want to add anything?
I mean, I think that I've been at this for just a little over a decade now, and the Grantee Perception Report has given me the great privilege to be in a lot of boardrooms of foundations as they think about the interpretation, as Sarah mentioned, sort of the response to these kinds of results. And one of the things that I've been constantly impressed by is that once boards have this kind of information, the kind of substantive conversation they have that really shows a deep caring about the kind of impact that their foundations can create and how to maximize that impact is just incredible. It's been really, honestly, inspirational to me over the course of the last decade. And I think that it can be a hard sell to boards to reach out and get this kind of feedback. Foundations are, particularly private foundations, can be fairly private organizations. But once that hurdle is passed and this information comes back, again and again and again, I just see incredibly rich conversations at boards. And I think that, as I talk to boards about whether to do this or not, is what I always point to. I promise them that the information that comes back is going to drive a strategic and a rich conversation about how to best use the foundation's resources to make a difference.
Couple just quick process questions from, do you present, perhaps we didn't address this, do you present the results in person? And then a related question, if I were to participate in the February round, what's the earliest I could get my results?
Yep. So when we start with the presentations question, it does vary. As I mentioned, we have a lot of flexibility around sort of scope of this kind of work, and there are some costs associated with us presenting the results in person. But the vast majority of foundations decide that they do want CEP to present these results in person to either staff and or board, in part because we've done this a lot and can bring sort of some perspective on what results, beyond just the report, how these results look and how to respond to them, but also because we have a lot of stories from our research and our case studies about how other foundations have reacted to results or structured their work. So we do a lot of presentations, and I think they can be very valuable, but it's not 100% of the time that we present in person. And the second question, Phil, was
just how quickly could I get my results if I were in the February survey round? What's the earliest I could get the results?
So the February survey round launches in mid-February. The surveys tend to be open for about 6 weeks, so they close at the end of March. The earliest we can get results back at this point is probably May. It does take us some time to combine the data into the comparative data set, and we're very focused on quality here at CEP. We want to make sure that what we're handing to you is going to drive the right kinds of conversations and reflection and learning in your organization.
Great. I don't have any other questions coming through. So I think what I'd like to do is give you an opportunity, and you, Kevin, if you have anything you didn't say that you'd like to add, or any final parting thoughts before we conclude. There?
No, I guess I appreciate the opportunity to share our experience. It's been a positive one for us. I think it's important to have a third party like the CEP in the middle who can compare the fine differences in each in answers that your grantees and applicants are providing. And we have found this valuable and helpful in moving us forward. So I'd encourage others to do it.
Thanks, Kevin. Do you have any final thoughts?
I think the only final thought I have is that you should reach out and get some more information from CEP about how this could work for the particular circumstances of your organization. I just flipped our slides to my contact information here in Cambridge, and Grace, who couldn't join us today, and then my colleague Austin Long in our San Francisco office. You should feel free to reach out to any of us, and we're happy to have just a quick conversation with you about how this could fit for your organization. And then the last thing that I would mention is just to remind you that we do have this discount, this early bird discount opportunity right now for the rest of the month of October. So don't hesitate to reach out and get a little more information. Thanks so much for letting me present this today.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Thayer, very much for sharing your story. Really, really appreciate it. We have recorded this webinar, and we will have it available on our website if you want to share it with your colleagues who were unable to join. That'll be up at some point within the next few days. So thanks to all of you for joining. Just want to thank our colleague Laurel Mitchell, who's been sitting here with us and did all the work to get this together, as well as Grace, who's trying to get well. And thanks, and hope to hear from you. Take care. Have a good day. Bye-bye.